July 1945. A remote Pacific island at dusk. In a dank bunker carved into coral rock, a Japanese naval officer sits hunched over a faint radio. Outside, monsoon rain patters on palm fronds that emaciated soldiers stir weakly in the mud. The officer's hand trembles as he reads an intercepted report. The Americans have a new kind of vessel, an entire ship dedicated just to making ice cream. He shuts his eyes, recalling his own men's hollow cheeks and half rations of rice. How can we fight an enemy that treats dessert as a weapon, he wonders. In that moment, his last hope dies. Rumor has it that when Japanese troops learned a ship existed solely to churn out ice cream, they understood they could not possibly hope to win. The officer's morale, like the dwindling supplies on his island, has finally broken. The Pacific War, 1942-45. Two mighty forces are locked in a ferocious struggle across jungles and oceans. The Empire of Japan, once on a lightning offensive across Asia, now finds itself pushed back by the relentless advance of the United States and Allied forces. Both sides know this is a war of attrition and endurance, fought as much with supply lines as with bullets. An army marches on its stomach, Napoleon once said. In this modern war, an entire navy does too. From day one, securing food, fuel, and ammunition is as crucial as any strategy. And on the endless expanse of the Pacific, morale can tip the balance between life and death. Allied and Japanese challenges. Early in the war, Japan surged forward, seizing resource-rich colonies and far-flung islands, but their supply chains stretched thin across thousands of miles of ocean. By late 1942, cracks showed. On Guadalcanal, Japanese troops found themselves starving. American air and naval power strangled Japan's supply convoys, leaving the encircled Japanese garrison with almost nothing. The result was ghastly. Disease and hunger killed as many as the fighting. A Japanese historian noted that once Allied planes dominated the skies, Japanese forces were constantly under threat of starvation on Guadalcanal. The mighty imperial troops were withered to skeletons, forced to eat roots and worms. Japan's early victories were built on aggression and sacrifice, but their soldiers' stomachs were now empty. Meanwhile, the Americans learned fast. What they lacked at first, they made up for with industrial muscle and logistics. Island by island, as Marines and soldiers fought brutal battles, the U.S. Navy established a seaborne supply web stretching back to Hawaii and California. Lumbering cargo ships and tankers became lifelines, delivering everything from bullets to bacon, and as the front moved closer to Japan, the U.S. built advanced bases, like the sprawling Ulithi Atoll, turned into a floating city of warships, repair docks, and depot ships. On these bases, comfort items became as valued as ammunition. Clean uniforms, mail from home, hot coffee, and, increasingly, ice cream were provided to keep morale high in the most hellish environments. The surprising secret weapon, ice cream. In the U.S., ice cream had exploded in popularity between the wars. By the 1940s, it wasn't just a dessert. It was American childhood in a bowl, a taste of home that could momentarily lift a weary soul. Top brass took notice. The War Department and Navy, prodded by the dairy industry, came to see ice cream as a force multiplier, an edible morale booster as important as tobacco or mail. One assistant to Navy Secretary James Forrestal even wrote, "Ice cream, in my opinion, has been the most neglected of all the important morale factors." Forrestal took it to heart. Getting ice cream to the troops became a priority. Soon, any ship large enough got a gedunk bar, sailor slang for an ice cream parlor. Carriers, battleships, cruisers, each was equipped to serve sundaes in cones in the middle of the ocean. The idea was simple. A sailor savoring a scoop of vanilla after surviving an air raid might just remember what he's fighting for. By 1944, the U.S. Navy even did the unthinkable. They built special ice cream ships. technically called barge, refrigerated large, BRL. These were massive concrete barges retrofitted as floating ice cream factories. One $1 million conversion could churn out 10 gallons of ice cream every 7 minutes and store 2,000 gallons in its freezers. Tugs would tow this ungainly ice cream barge to forward bases like Ulithi, and smaller boats would ferry the frozen cargo to the fleet. In effect, the Navy had created a mobile dairy, following the combat forces island to island. It wasn't done in secret either. The National Dairy Products Corporation even ran cheerful ads in U.S. magazines touting the Navy's ice cream barge, calling it the floating ice cream factory, and urging Americans at home to buy war bonds. The message was clear. Our boys would get their favorite treat, no matter the cost. Okinawa, April 1945. The bloodiest battle of the Pacific. Nowhere was the contrast in morale and supply more stark than on this strategic island, just 340 miles from Japan's home islands. At dawn on April 1st, 1945, L-Day, an armada of U.S. transports unleashes tens of thousands of Marines and Army infantry onto Okinawa's beaches. The air is hot and heavy with sea mist. Landing craft ramps splash open, and young men rush onto sand expecting a storm of bullets, but eerie silence greets them. Unknown to the invaders, the Japanese 32nd Army has pulled back to heavily fortified inland lines. The calm before the storm. By afternoon, U.S. troops push inland through quiet farmland and tomb-dotted hills. Some even wonder if the enemy fled. In reality, General Mitsuru Ushijima's 100,000 defenders lie in wait, dug into a warren of caves and concrete bunkers across a rugged escarpment known as the Shuri Line. On April 6th, hell erupts. Japanese artillery and mortars open up, and kamikaze suicide pilots come shrieking down from the sky towards the offshore fleet. Boom! A gigantic fireball erupts on the deck of the aircraft carrier USS Hancock as a kamikaze plane scores a direct hit. Alarms wail across the fleet. Air raid, all hands to battle stations. Dozens of kamikazes pierce the flak curtain. U.S. gunners on destroyers and picket ships pump tracers into them by the thousands. Off Okinawa's coast, the sea is dotted with burning ships and oil slicks. Sailors on the decks of larger vessels watch in grim determination, guns thundering. A Japanese Zero dives toward the USS Missouri, aiming to crash into the bridge. At the last second, it is blown apart by anti-aircraft fire, raining debris into the waves. The sky is black with smoke, and the air smells of salt, fuel, and blood. Over 2 days, 355 kamikazes sacrifice themselves in massive coordinated waves. Dozens of U.S. ships are hit, hundreds of sailors killed or wounded. The fleet reels, but it does not retreat. Fueled by round-the-clock logistics, damaged ships are patched up, fires extinguished, and fresh ammunition hoisted up from magazines. Witnessing the carnage, an American signalman writes in his diary, "This is a nightmare. Will it ever end?" Yet every evening, when the attacks finally subside, U.S. crews steel themselves for the next day, often with a simple comfort. Aboard the battleship USS Tennessee, after a brutal day of fending off kamikazes, mess stewards bring topside a special treat saved for such moments. Ice cream in metal canisters kept cold in the depths of the ship. As twilight falls, exhausted gunners line up, helmets in hand as makeshift bowls, to receive a few scoops of chocolate ice cream. The deck is silent except for the clink of scoops and the distant cries of wounded men. Some sailors eat slowly, eyes closed, letting the sweetness wash away the taste of cordite and fear. For a brief moment, the war feels half a world away. Far inland, on Okinawa's convoluted ridges, the U.S. infantry face a different kind of hell. In mid-April, they slam into the Shuri defensive line and are met with fanatical resistance. Rain turns the hills into mud pits. Every draw and gully is zeroed by Japanese machine guns and artillery. A platoon of Marines from the 1st Division crawls uphill through thick mud under machine gun fire, so intense it snaps bamboo stalks in half around them. The Marines nickname one killing field Sugarloaf Hill with grim irony. There is nothing sweet about it. Men collapse from heat and fear, and the stench of death, a mix of rotting corpses and sulfur from gunpowder, hangs over the battlefield. In a forward foxhole, Private Joe Ramirez wipes sweat and grime from his eyes as he loads another magazine into his M1 rifle. A barrage of artillery shells whistles in, exploding with deafening blasts that shake the earth and send jagged shrapnel screaming through the air. Ramirez's squad has been pinned down for hours by a bunker at the hill's crest. Finally, with a guttural yell, a flamethrower team moves up, spewing a jet of fire that engulfs the Japanese pillbox. The enemy position goes silent with a horrid screech, the defenders either burned alive or fleeing through tunnels. Ramirez slumps in his trench as the firing dies down. His hands tremble as he reaches for his canteen. Only a few warm drops of water dribble out. They've been fighting for days without rest. Supplies are slow to come through the blasted terrain. Suddenly, a shout comes down the line. "Hot chow! Hot chow coming up!" Amazingly, behind the lines, a supply detail has managed to bring insulated food containers forward. As Ramirez trudges back to a rear rally point, he blinks in disbelief. Along with beans and coffee, the cooks are handing out individual half-pint cartons of ice-cold ice cream to each man. The ice cream had been ferried ashore from a refrigeration barge offshore and trucked up in haste. Grimy Marines grin like kids at the sight. Ramirez savors each spoonful of the melting vanilla. In his diary that night he writes simply, "I cried eating it. Tasted like home." For these war-weary fighters, such moments of joy fortify their spirit to continue the grinding battle. World War II sailors aboard a U.S. Navy cruiser flock to an onboard ice cream fountain for a sweet respite from war. In the absence of alcohol, the Navy made ice cream a central morale booster at sea. The enemy's plight. What about the Japanese on Okinawa? Their experience is one of increasing desperation. Cut off from resupply by Allied naval blockade, they subsist on dwindling rations of rice, sporadic vegetables, and even by slaughtering local oxen. By May, many Japanese soldiers are literally starving. Dysentery and malnutrition spread in the dank tunnels under Shuri. A Japanese infantryman notes in a letter, left unsent, that he hasn't had a full meal in weeks and that hunger is a second enemy in our bellies. As American shelling becomes constant, some civilians hiding with Japanese troops wail in hunger and fear. Yet Tokyo's orders are clear. No surrender. Fight to the last man. The Japanese commanders on Okinawa, General Ushijima and his fiery chief of staff, General Isamu Cho, strictly enforce the code of death before dishonor. They witness their men's condition with heavy hearts, but believe that sacrificing Okinawa will buy time for the homeland. Little do they know, American plenty is rendering that hope futile. Turning point. Shuri falls. After nearly 2 months of slugging through mutually inflicted hell, the balance decisively tips. In late May 1945, under unrelenting pressure, the Japanese defense begins to crumble. On May 29th, U.S. Marines of the 1st Division finally capture the ruins of Shuri Castle, the linchpin of the enemy line, after days of bombing and naval gunfire. The ancient fortress is a smoldering wreck, blasted by 16-inch shells from USS Mississippi. Marines raise an American flag, and briefly a Texas flag and even a Confederate flag in one famous photo, over the rubble as a sign that the backbone of resistance is broken. For the Japanese 32nd Army, the fall of Shuri is devastating. General Ushijima's headquarters, deep in a tunnel beneath the castle, had to be abandoned even before the final assault. The command staff flees southward through mud and pouring rain, moving to secondary caves on the Kian Peninsula. Soldiers who can still fight retreat in disarray, while thousands of wounded and sick are left behind with just grenades for a final suicide if necessary. As the Americans advance into the island's southern tip in June, scenes of chaos and tragedy unfold. Trapped Japanese units launch banzai charges, frenzied suicidal attacks, only to be cut down by American fire. Many Japanese soldiers, now out of food and ammunition, resort to extreme measures. Some blow themselves up with grenades in mass suicide rather than surrender. Civilians, terrified by imperial propaganda of American atrocities, jump off cliffs or give poison to their children. The Battle of Okinawa is reaching its ghastly climax. Amid this collapse, one Japanese communication officer monitoring Allied radio broadcasts hears an unbelievable claim. The U.S. Navy at Ulithi has been celebrating the victory at Shuri by dishing out ice cream to every sailor. He cannot fathom it. While his comrades are eating grass and clay, the enemy treats itself to luxuries in the combat zone. That night, he pens a final entry in his log. "We can no longer call ourselves warriors. We are demons gnawing on scraps in darkness as the enemy feasts in the light." It is not an official report, just the despairing poetry of a man facing the end. Innovation and commitment. Indeed, the Americans' capacity to sustain morale was astounding. As Okinawa raged, the Navy's ice cream barge at Ulithi Atoll worked overtime to supply the fleet. Tankers and supply ships heading to the frontline anchorages carried extra frozen tubs among their cargo of shells and fuel. The U.S. Army, not to be outdone, had constructed miniature ice cream plants on land. In Europe and the Pacific alike, mobile units cranked out ice cream near the front, and by early 1945, Operation Freeze missions had delivered half-pint cups of ice cream right into forward foxholes. American airmen got creative too. During long bombing runs, crews would mix powdered milk, sugar, and cocoa in a canister and strap it inside a B-17's freezing bomb bay. Hours at high altitude churned and froze the mix. By the time the bomber returned, the crew could scoop out a frozen chocolatey treat, ice cream made literally in the line of fire. There's even a story of restless Marines rigging drop tanks on fighter planes as makeshift ice cream makers, using altitude and vibration to churn the dessert. Nothing, it seemed, would stop the American fighting man from getting his favorite comfort, not even enemy flak. On the high seas, rescue destroyers eagerly chased down U.S. pilots shot down in combat, partly motivated by a sweet reward. Admirals had decreed that any destroyer crew who fished a ditched pilot out of the ocean would be gifted gallons of ice cream from the fleet carrier as thanks. One sailor recalled telling his captain of this tradition during the Okinawa campaign, "We ended up giving 30 gallons of ice cream to a destroyer that returned a pilot." This set a new precedent for the return of aviators. A rescued Hellcat pilot, Lieutenant Norman Stark, later joked that the destroyer crew that saved him weren't seeing me, but what I was worth to them, 10 gallons of ice cream. It's a humorous anecdote with a serious underpinning. American morale and camaraderie were buoyed by seemingly trivial things that reminded them of home. Ice cream was now currency and motivation in war, a symbol that even amid carnage, life's little joys persisted. June 1945. Okinawa secured. After 82 days of relentless battle, Okinawa is finally declared secure on June 22, 1945. The cost is staggering. Over 12,000 Americans lie dead, and 50,000 more wounded. The Japanese toll is far higher. Around 100,000 soldiers perished, essentially the entire defending force, and as many Okinawan civilians were killed in the crossfire or by suicide. General Ushijima and General Cho, true to their code, commit seppuku, ritual suicide, in their hillside command cave as U.S. troops close in. When the shooting stops, the once lush southern Okinawan landscape is a wasteland of shattered trees, shell holes, and unburied bodies. U.S. servicemen stand exhausted amid the smoke, profoundly relieved that it's over. An army sergeant writing home finds himself at a loss for words. "Okinawa is secured," he scribbles. But God help us, what a price we paid. The survivors know this was a preview of what an invasion of Japan's home islands might look like, a nightmare they hope to avoid. Yet, even as they count their dead, American troops get a taste of vindication. At a field hospital on Okinawa, Navy nurses distribute bowls of ice cream to wounded Marines on their cots, courtesy of a new Navy mobile ice cream trailer shipped ashore. On the deck of an offshore hospital ship, medics hand amputees small cups of vanilla, bringing genuine smiles to pain-racked faces. One young Marine, his arm bandaged and eyes banded against flash burns, murmurs, "I'm gonna live. I've got to. They owe me more ice cream." Gallows humor, perhaps, but indicative of the indomitable spirit still burning. Meanwhile, the Japanese High Command in Tokyo hears the Okinawa reports with despair. They had thrown the kitchen sink into that battle, even turning planes into human-guided missiles, and still failed. Their navy is all but annihilated, their air force nearly spent, their soldiers are starving, cut off on scattered islands. And now intelligence reports confirm truly demoralizing news. The Americans are so well supplied that their troops were eating ice cream on Okinawa's front lines, and an American fleet barge at Ulithi is manufacturing thousands of gallons of it. The contrast is unbearable. As one Japanese Navy officer later admitted, realizing the U.S. had devoted precious resources to something as frivolous as ice cream and could do so without hindering their war effort, was a shock to Japanese planners. It drove home how hopelessly outmatched Japan was in industrial might. Japanese naval ratings were almost starved, while American sailors could drink Coca-Cola and eat ice cream, historian James Holland wrote, underscoring that U.S. morale supremacy made victory only a matter of time. The wider war and ultimate outcome. The fall of Okinawa in June 1945 positions the Allies at Japan's doorstep. The U.S. begins preparing for a possible invasion of the Japanese home islands, code-named Operation Downfall, scheduled for late 1945, a prospect that looms as an even bloodier sequel to Okinawa. But history takes a different turn. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, the United States drops atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, introducing a terrifying new weapon that renders further conventional invasion unnecessary. On August 15th, the Japanese emperor announces the nation's surrender. World War II is effectively over. Victory in the Pacific was achieved not just by advanced weapons or tactical genius, but by the grinding down of Japan's ability and will to fight, a result of overwhelming American production, supply, and yes, morale. When Japanese envoys arrive aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, to sign the surrender, they are greeted by rows of healthy, well-fed American sailors at attention. One can only imagine what the vanquished representatives think, seeing the soldiers of a nation so wealthy in resources that even in the final push on Japan, it supplied its men with ice cream 3 times a week. In a small, ironic footnote, the USS Missouri itself, like all American battleships, had a fully stocked ice cream fountain below decks. In fact, throughout the war, the Missouri's crew enjoyed such plentiful ice cream that the ship earned a joking nickname, the Mighty Moo, for its dairy delights. The Japanese delegation surely smelled the aroma of coffee and sweet cream wafting through the corridors that morning. For them, surrender was bitter and perhaps tinged with the faint sweetness of melted ice cream in the air. As Allied occupation forces spread through a defeated Japan and liberated POW camps, they confronted a humanitarian nightmare: mass hunger. The Japanese home front had been suffering terrible food shortages. By 1945, many civilians were malnourished, and ration lines stretched for blocks. American troops began distributing food to stave off famine. Ironically, one of the treats U.S. soldiers shared with Japanese children in those early days of peace was powdered milk and ice cream mix from their rations. A Japanese child who tasted it marveled, having never had anything so cold and sweet. In this way, the very symbol of American abundance that highlighted Japan's defeat became one of the first tokens of American generosity in rebuilding a shattered nation, morale as a weapon. The story of the ice cream ships is more than a quaint wartime oddity. It's a vivid demonstration of how morale and logistics won the war behind the scenes. Soldiers and sailors fight better when they have full stomachs and hope in their hearts. American leadership understood this deeply. By devoting industrial capacity to creature comforts like ice cream, the U.S. kept its forces happier, healthier, and more effective under brutal conditions. A Japanese officer captured in 1945 purportedly confessed that he realized Japan was doomed when he learned the Americans had an ice cream ship for their troops. The sheer economic disparity, the idea that the U.S. could spare an entire ship just for making ice cream, snapped him out of any illusion of victory. To him, that ship was the ultimate symbol of overwhelming American power, not just the power to kill, but the power to sustain its people. In the final accounting, the human cost of the Pacific War was horrific, and attributing victory to something as simple as ice cream would be a disservice. Battles were won through valor and sacrifice, through fire and steel. But the presence of ice cream on the front lines tells a larger truth about World War II. That wars are won not only by those who have the most firepower, but by those who have the strongest will and means to keep fighting day after day. Morale can be as decisive as strategy. The U.S. kept its morale high and its warriors comforted, whereas Japanese morale steadily eroded under hunger and hopelessness. As 1945 turned into peace, the U.S. military did not forget the lesson. In occupied Japan and across bases at home, serving ice cream became a tradition, a reminder of normalcy. General Louis Chesty Puller, a legendary Marine, groused that ice cream was sissy food and lobbied for liquor instead after the war, but the Pentagon firmly disagreed, ordering that troops be served ice cream at least 3 times a week going forward. The old general lost that battle. The sweet taste of victory had clearly included a scoop of vanilla. August 1945, Ulithi Atoll. Under a bright tropical sun, the once secret ice cream barge bobs gently in the lagoon, now openly flying the stars and stripes. Its job is done. Sailors won't need floating ice cream factories in peacetime. But today it dispenses one last round of treats. Laughing Navy crewmen line up with tin cups as the barge's pumps whir and churn out soft serve by the gallon. There is a carefree, festive mood in the air. Warships around the atoll toot their horns in celebration. Japan has surrendered. A few Japanese prisoners of war, brought here en route to POW camps, watch this scene in silent astonishment from the decks of a transport ship. These gaunt young men in tattered uniforms see their former enemies jubilant and well-fed, eating ice cream in victory. Some avert their gaze in shame and anger. Others stare, perhaps secretly wondering what that cold confection tastes like. The ice cream ships did not win the war by themselves, of course, but they were part of a vast, often invisible campaign to win hearts and minds, to keep American spirits higher than those of their adversary. In the end, the strategy worked. Morale broke before the enemy did. The Japanese officer in our opening scene wasn't wrong. How could a nation on the brink of starvation ever prevail against a nation rich enough to ship frozen desserts to the front? The sight of that ice cream barge was a psychological body blow from which the Japanese war effort never recovered. As the camera of history pulls back, we are left with a poignant image. A weary soldier savoring a scoop of ice cream amid the ruins of war. It's a small joy in a sea of suffering, a symbol of innocence and comfort against a backdrop of destruction. This is how morale wins battles, by giving the soldier a reason to carry on one more day, by reminding him of the world he's fighting to protect. The tale of the ice cream ships teaches us that sometimes the most ordinary things, a sweet taste, a cold sensation on a hot day, can have extraordinary power. In World War II, a humble bowl of ice cream became a secret weapon that nourished victory and broke the spirit of those who could only dream of such luxuries. In war, it's often the side with the greater soul, not just the bigger gun, that prevails. And sometimes, maintaining that soul might just come down to keeping the men smiling over a dish of ice cream.